Reliable.
Commitment 100%.
Like it. Reliable. That is, I think we lost her again. TGV connection. Marcella is reliable, the train is not. Hi, Sabrina. Right. What's going on here? 2 people want to join, but they're stuck in the waiting room. There we go. Okay. That is looking good. Welcome to Neuroccino on the 29th of January. Hi, Abby. Before I forget, we also have, well done, Marcella. We also have a CNS talk this week on Wednesday by Gregory Hickok, Going Beyond Broca. So that should be an interesting talk to start the year with. Now, today, Lilith is going to present a paper. If you can share the link already in the chat, that'd be great. And Lilith is a, well, that was fast. Lilith is a PhD student with us in Nijmegen. Now, Lilith, when you're ready, take it away.
All right. It's okay. You see the paper? All right. So, today I want to show actually a provoking article, I think. It was published 3 months ago, not in November last year, by Tamar Makin and John Krakauer in eLife Journal. So when I saw the title, I had to read at least one more time because I could not believe that this says against cortical reorganization. At that moment, I thought that these authors are really brave. And I mean, when there are a lot of evidence that showcases brain reorganization, how is it possible? I take, for example, children after hemispherectomy, right? It's a surgery when one hemisphere, for example, is removed because that child has epilepsy, seizures. So these children, technically, they can recover. Okay, smile. Technically, these children can recover. So we would say that the spared hemisphere is taking over, right, the function of the removed hemisphere. How else can we explain this? So with that confusion and boiling over energy inside me, I decided to, okay, let's read this paper. Well, in short, this is just purely theoretical work. So there are no experiments that showing a specific one evidence that, okay, we don't have a cortical reorganization. No, this paper sort of debunks interpretations of the results obtained from some critical, classical pieces of evidence that are aimed to tell us that we have cortical organization. So, and these papers, we know them all. They are all over textbooks, and this is what we are taught in universities. This is very long paper, 30 pages of pure theory, basically, and logical debunking. I don't know how to say this. So, but I picked 2 or 3 most striking, famous cases, but I really recommend to read it all because it introduces or maybe reminds us about a non-mainstream perspective to look into this kind of data. So I really suggest you to try to read it and understand what they mean. Well, before jumping into the exact examples, authors, they are making clear what they understand by cortical reorganization. So, Cortical reorganization refers to preserved brain tissue taking on a new functional role. So pretty clear. Basically, it's, for example, the right hemisphere is removed, and now the left hemisphere, the one is spared, is taking over a new function, okay? In more detailed words, cortical reorganization or remapping is interpreted as a circuit receiving novel input and processing it in a way unrelated to its original function. Okay, so it receives categorically, or they say qualitatively, novel input. So for example, I don't know, it was processing before visual information. Now that brain tissue is processing tactile information. So something that is different from the wild type of our brain. So to best illustrate this cortical reorganization, let's look at this figure. This is not one of the examples that the classical exams that they're going to talk about, but this example helps help me to understand their logic throughout all the examples that will follow after. So, and it helps you understand what is cortical reorganization and what is not cortical reorganization. So this is a figure from this paper, Zeiger and colleagues, 2021. Here, well, this was an experiment on mice, okay? On the left part of the figure, you see three kind of columns. Each column corresponds to a cellular aggregates that are called barrels in somatosensory cortex of mice. So each column corresponds to some part in the brain, and that brain responds and receives information from one whisker on the rodent's face. Okay, so for example, the barrel C1 receives information from whisker 1 of that mice. And these dots, red dots, blue dots, and purple dots, they are just, let me put it maybe closer. They are just different neurons, okay? So what they did in this experiment, they destroyed barrels C1, okay? And as you can see, there are some neurons also on the adjacent barrels that are also colored in red, which means that some neurons on the adjacent barrels, on the adjacent whiskers of that mice, also can respond to the whisker that corresponds to C1. I hope this is clear. So they destroyed C1, and you see that these red dots that were previously on the adjacent ones, the intensity of the red decreased right after stroke. And the authors are saying so that when we say we observe remapping or cortical reorganization, we should see that some pre-stroke neurons, let's say, I don't know, this blue one, okay, becomes now start to respond to new input. So for example, here the case of the case of remapping, where one of the neurons switched the identity from blue to red. But this is not what the authors of that paper observed. What they observed is these two cases. One case, they didn't do nothing with mice, and there was actually a spontaneous recovery. And what happened here is that the intensity only of already pre-existing neurons become higher. So the neurons started to respond more to the inputs they were already responding before. Okay, and in case of, I don't know, mice rehabilitation recovery program, those neurons that again were pre-existing before stroke, their intensity became even higher. So that's the point. So what I mean that this example is central to this paper, and the main claim of these authors is that in the cases when researchers talk about cortical reorganization or remapping, those cases actually has nothing to do with actual reorganization. So it's only, they claim that it's only pre-existing innate circuits become unmasked, and they continue to do what they have been doing, those neurons, those circuits, but now with higher intensity. So those circuits become upregulated because there are no anymore the main neurons that were responding to that input. So here is the change, right, in these two cases, is only qualitative, and this is what we see here in the one when they switched the identity is categorical change, and this is not what they found. So this is the main central to this paper idea, and they are trying to explain that actually the classical papers that are meant to say that we have cortical reorganization, they actually just, there is no reorganization. It's just only the increase of the intensity of the innate circuits. So there are a lot of interesting examples, both in animals, humans, but for example, there is this study that I can tell you, monocular deprivation in kittens. I think everyone remembers those poor kittens of the famous Hebbian weasel. A quick reminder, kittens were born and immediately the right eye was occluded for a period of several months, okay? Then the eye was reopened and kittens were clumsy, so there was a problem, okay? So even though congenitally those kittens were not blind, so by occluding it, depriving them one of the eyes, the kittens become, they get cognitive impairment, okay? So what they did, in the classical study, they opened the eye and they looked at the V1 to see what this procedure did to kittens. And what they found is that the left V1, the primary visual cortex of kittens, so the left one was the one that was deprived because the right eye was occluded, okay? So the left V1 started to respond to stimulus arriving from non-occluded eye. So basically, the one eye that should not supposedly go to the left hemisphere, okay? And this study sort of cemented in our minds the idea that when input is locally deprived due to early life occlusion, then the deprived cortical columns are taken over by the unaffected eye. So basically, since the left hemisphere is kind of empty, there is no more information getting there from the right hemisphere, then the unaffected eye will also send new information there, since brain has to be maybe filled in with the processing. It cannot stay empty. So yeah, but what authors are saying is that this is not actually the taking over situation or cortical reorganization, because there are mixed population of cells that that, as in case of mice, they start to be upregulated and respond to input they already have been responding before, but at this moment it becomes unmasked, and we as researchers can notice it. But it does not mean that before they were not responding. So this is one case. Let's see the time. And then we can talk, for example, congenitally blind individuals. The idea is the same, right? But the idea is that there is also this famous study where the primary visual cortex of blind people started to be activated during, for example, reading Braille. So basically, in this case, we would say that the visual cortex is empty, and now visual cortex becomes also somatosensory cortex because it has to be filled with some processing information, and the visual cortex switches identity and becomes somatosensory cortex. But again, this is not the case because as you might say, that authors would say the same thing, that this is not the case of cortical reorganization, because the idea of visual cortex just for visual perception is the consequences of oversimplification. So in the textbooks, when we see, I don't know, explain it like a brain, and there is a crisp borders between visual cortex that is and says this is for perception, temporal cortex, this is for speech. So this is oversimplification of the way brain is actually working. It's not that this is just for perception. And this is what they also say, and they are providing some evidence for that this happens just because there is an increased activity of those pre-existing circuits that already were responding to some information coming from tactile. I don't know, something like that. Yeah, in other words, the observation of increased activity of non-visual task in visual course of the blind does not imply that this input is novel. So it was already there, just now is with a higher intensity. Maybe another one I can tell. Yeah, all the examples are super interesting, and so yeah, this one. Do you know, for example, Ramachandran? It's a super famous thing that was, I don't know, it was really convincing when I was attending one course at university on brain plasticity or something like that. But the authors killed about the cortical representation, this hope about this also here. So the study was about that some amputees, they had no hand anymore after surgery, and now when you touch the face, the lower part of the face, they can feel some sensations in their hand. But it seems that the study was not so much controlled. So in replications with control group, control suggestions, there was no more this effect. And maybe there is also this review that can be interesting to read about this topic. Yeah, obviously there was also about this, and this felt personal, but about ischemic stroke in primary motor cortex. So here again, the same idea. I want to more maybe discuss with you this. So again, it's the same idea that pre-existing circuits, they become stronger. And actually with that, they focus. Yeah, also this idea, they are not talking about what is Elon Musk doing actually, but the idea of it's a question. Can our brain actually adapt to something new that was not already there? Yeah, and this is an interesting topic to also talk about. But another thing that is also I'm curious to talk with you is that this paper not only goes against mainstream and clears up our understanding of maybe recovery, what is recovery actually, but it's also an example of purely theoretical work that has implication in practice. Because if we don't believe in cortical reorganization, but we believe in unmasking and strengthening of pre-existing innate connections and circuits to restore the functions after stroke. So our rehabilitation should be focused on understanding the capacities of the specific individual that has anatomically, and trying to strengthen those connections that are already there, those circuits that are already there. So trying to reorganize cortex might be not an efficient way to do something, because for now, I mean, at least in those cases that they described, it's not the case. The case is always upregulation over existing circuits. So yeah, for me, it was interesting to read this, to change a bit perspective, or at least to consider this perspective. Yeah, I hope it was also interesting for you. And if you have questions or some discussions on, I don't know, parts or examples, I am happy to talk. Okay.
Thank you, Lilith. Great paper. Hands are already up. Chris.
Thank you for presenting that. I always had this feeling with the studies that are saying that there is a cortical reorganization, because there are because to claim that, you would also need to show that there are some mechanisms that can uh, make this reorganization, right? Because but the problem is there are some studies that show that there is very few new neurons that can be created by, at least by humans, and that it's. I mean, I didn't see any paper showing that they are, because to reorganize the cortex, you would need new neurons, new pathways, new connections. But the problem is that maybe local connections can grow after a stroke or another disorder or whatever. But long range connections, they can't go from one side of the brain to the other once you're an adult, for example. So I never understood how it could be possible that the cortex would reorganize itself from things that don't exist. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that they show that in what they
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, they went really in details, like many examples, but then I'm still going back to these children who undergone hemispherectomy. So if those children
Yeah, but
can
maybe the
recover,
situation is different, right? Because children have a different dynamic of their brain is changing a lot, and it's been shown that the plasticity, for example, is completely different from if you compare adults and children. So that could
Yeah.
explain actual reorganization.
No. The thing is that these authors, they don't believe in the organization at all. So they are even
Even
giving,
with kids.
yeah, because
Okay.
that's the reason why they provided the study of Hubel and Wiesel about deprivation of kittens, because those kittens, they were in
Yeah, this
critical
is
period, and so they go really extreme, saying that there are no such a thing of reorganization, but there is some critical period of increased plasticity of this quantitative change.
Yeah. Yeah, but so then yeah, it's the same principle as there is a period where you can increase like change the connection, increase the connection strength.
Yeah, but does it mean then? So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that if children, after one hemisphere is removed, they can go back to normal life, okay? It means that the left hemisphere has pre-existing circuits that has the right hemisphere, and that it is always working. It's just when the right hemisphere is removed, there is a possibility of qualitative increase of responsiveness to the hemisphere, to the input of the right hemisphere. So which means, does it mean that we have just mirrored functions? Also can be
What the thing with
evolutionary
the
nice
kitten, doesn't
thing,
that
right?
show that 'cause you were saying that these kittens had the visual circuitry that was usually dedicated to the eye that was closed, that was actually acting for the with the eye, the only eye that
Yeah.
was open. So that means that there is already a pathway to
Yeah.
handle what the
Yeah.
other hemisphere
Yeah. But that's, it's just, I mean, it's not just, but it's also like just one part, visual cortex, primary visual cortex. But when we're talking about children, we're talking about the whole hemisphere. Like this is it's
well,
just a
to me
mirror
that's a great
then.
argument for emerging properties in the brain, but
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, this is the point that you are saying that you never understood this. So
yeah.
this paper just lays down all the arguments, and yeah, and it's a good paper, nice examples, nice way to discuss things. So yeah.
I have so many questions. I'm still stuck on, so that they say they're against the concept and the terminology of reorganization. But from what I got is that remapping they could get on board with. So to me, then the argument is, or the question is, where do you draw the line between remapping and reorganization?
I think they are using it synonymously. So remapping is when a neuron that was not responding to specific stimulus now is responding. So before it was not responding to visual information, and now it starts to respond to tactile information. This is what they would call cortical reorganization or remapping. So the main idea is that it's the neuron starts to process physiologically new information that was not responding before, while just plasticity in terms of quantitative increase. If you remember this figure with the mice and red dots, so this is what they mean, that it has to be just increase the intensity of the red, rather than red changing to totally new thing like blue.
Okay, I definitely have to read that paper.
Okay.
But I do agree with rewiring doesn't exist. So we see that in stroke a lot, that people talk about plasticity in the sense of rewiring, and that is just, it's not happening. If you look at the cavity, it's still a cavity. There's no
Yeah,
no
but
pathways for anything.
here they are actually not talking about, I mean, explicitly about white matter.
No, it's cortical plasticity, but
Yeah,
the same logic applies, right?
Yeah. So they say that no rewiring. I think they, 1 second, there are like a list of words that they don't like.
Yeah, takeover,
It is often
rewiring.
described as remapping, remodeling, expansion, rewiring, takeover, invasion, reoccupation, and even capture. So yeah, these words they don't like.
I agree on that.
Yeah.
This actually sounds like this would be a good one for a nightcap to properly dissect all the arguments.
Yeah.
Because sadly we are out of time this morning.
Yeah.
But great find. Thank you very much for presenting it. Definitely have to read it. And I would also, everyone's up for a nightcap. Yay, let's do it. We have a CNS talk this week, as I mentioned, by Greg Hickok, called Beyond Broca Neuroarchitecture and Evolution of a Duomotor Speech Coordination System. So do join us Wednesday, 4 p.m. Central European time. Until then, have an exciting week in science. See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.